Hello, everybody, and welcome to this guest series session for ValuesJam. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Rob Webster. So, Rob, would you like to introduce yourself and the great work that you do?
Hello, everybody. My name's Rob. I lead the West Yorkshire Health and Care Partnership that brings together councils with the NHS, communities and third sector organisations to improve outcomes for local people.
Wow, you said it so succinctly, but that's a big job, right?
Yeah, there's a lot going on, but it's the right thing, isn't it? That we look at the things that cause ill health, like, what kind of housing you've got, what kind of education, what employment, what the environment's like, as well as whether you can access services and treatment and whether the services and treatment are any good.
That sounds like a really unusual joined up approach, or is it not unusual?
It's becoming less unusual. So it's the new, I guess, the jargon that everybody uses is integrated care systems or integrated care boards or integrated care partnerships, a lot of stuff that most people wouldn't recognise in communities, but really it is about, prevention, joining up care, tackling inequalities, using our resources once so we can make the biggest difference together.
Fantastic. Okay, well, we're going to dive into our ValuesJam, and I've got the ValuesJam card deck here. So before we came online, I shuffled them. And so now, if I could ask you, how many times would you like me to cut the deck, Rob?
One's fine.
Just one, okay. And would you like left pile or right pile?
Let's go left.
Okay. And we've got loads here. So could you give me a number between probably 1 and 20?
17.
17.
So for a prime number.
We'll work from the... Oh, my goodness.
Excellent. There you go.
You might be able to talk about this.
I hope so.
All right. So the first question, Rob, what does leadership mean? And what does it look, feel, and sound like?
Leadership's, I think, defined by the ability to get people to follow you. So it's you can't be a leader unless if you don't have followers. And for me, leadership, is values based, happens at all levels, and it operates in systems, whether you're conscious of that or not. And I think that I see leadership in action every day in that fulfills those sorts of scenarios. So people who are taking a valued stance, using their values to guide them, people operating at different levels, people operating in the system. So leadership looks like Simon Mertzer from our system, who leads the children's programme, but is also a nurse, talking about race and racism and what we're doing about that in the NHS on the radio. She doesn't have a kind of formal leadership role in the system in terms of a chief exec or an executive director or any of that, but that's what she's just done. So I think that's somebody operating in a system, from at all levels, based on a set of values, to talk about a current topic. So I think that we can talk about leadership a lot, but it's got some of those components in it.
And what does it, so we're thinking metaphors now, Rob, but what does it feel like and what does it sound like?
Well, I think the feelings, the feelings I get through leadership are really based on positivity and satisfaction of seeing making a difference and seeing my team do well. I always enjoy seeing my staff do. I've realised my motivations for work to make a difference and see people do well and fulfil their potential. And I think what I see is that people like Simon, people like Fatima Khan Shah, people like some of my colleagues in councils and elsewhere in chief execs roles are fantastic leaders, and many of them have been, supported by other leaders to lead well. So I think leadership feels like a positive thing, irrespective of the context. Yeah. So, if you look at COVID, the first year of COVID was particularly horrendous. And I would say that it's some of the worst, it's one of the worst periods of my life and one of the best. Because what we proved, I think, that people that we've got have got so much potential and they are magnificent. And leadership at all levels and in the system, and that's based on values, made a massive difference to people. So I think leadership is a positive force for good, even in dire circumstances, really.
Yeah, and there's a number of things that you've mentioned there that I'd just like to pick up on. The first thing actually is, for me, leadership is about the way you behave. It's not about your title.
Yeah.
So I remember I was giving a talk at an event, and somebody asked the question about, am I allowed to do whatever it was? And I just found myself answering, saying, it's your choice. You can either choose to lead or you can choose not to lead. And the way I found myself encouraging them was because I just said, what's the worst that can happen? You're not going to get shot.
Yeah.
And so in my career, I saw so much good leadership displayed by people who didn't have official leadership titles.
Yeah.
And often better than the official leaders. So that's the first thing. The other that you mentioned, followers, and I just love what you said, because if people don't follow, then as a leader, you are redundant. There's just no point. And then in terms of what does it look, feel, and sound like?
Can we go back to the first point about, what's the worst that can happen, and it's people's choice. I think one of the roles of people with leadership, authority, and positional power, I think, is to retain accountability but give others authority.
Yeah.
And it's one of the behaviours that we've codified in our system of leadership. So I'm very happy to be accountable as a chief executive for the three things for which I'm accountable, really. I'm accountable for three things, which is the value of every penny that we spend, the safety of every person that we touch, and the well-being of every member of staff we employ. It boils down to that, really. And, I can sleep at night because we've got the right kind of values in the system, and because I'm giving people the authority to act based on those values. And I'm happy to be accountable because I will be. That process of saying and remaining accountable whilst giving other people power and authority really frees up people to deliver their potential. Yeah. And being explicit about it, I think, provides a bit of a safety net to what's the worst that can happen. Because you might say, you're not going to get shot, but if you ask people who've blown the whistle, or if you ask people who've raised issues around racism, for example, or homophobia, they'll say, actually, the consequences for me as an individual were terrible.
Yeah.
For some people, the circumstances consequently have been bad.
Yeah.
And if we create a culture where we're saying, no, actually, we want people to speak up, we want you to have the authority to act, to do the right things against an explicit set of values, then hopefully what's the worst that can happen is you fail at what you were attempting to do, and you learn some lessons.
Yeah, and that codification of the values actually legitimizes that conversation. Yeah. So I remember going to do it was a 31 practices review in a shopping centre, and one of their practices was to celebrate success and achievement. And I was interviewing a security guard, and he said to me, my boss has never told me I've done a good job, never. And I said to him, have you raised that with your boss? And he said, well, no, am I allowed to do that? And I said, yes, because your chief executive has signed off on this set of behaviors, and this is one of them. Yeah. So, it's not you personally having a go at your boss, it's you using this as a reference to be able to have that discussion, and nobody can criticize you for that.
Yeah.
In terms of the taking accountability and giving freedom, and this happens a lot in ValuesJams, Rob. It's reminded me of a story from it's probably around about 2002. I was heading up service delivery in a portfolio of bank properties, and we were providing a range of services, including catering. I was told that the bank was on cutback, and so we were not to put chocolate biscuits in the meeting rooms. The following day, I got told that there were still chocolate biscuits in the meeting rooms. Would I get on and do something about it? Communicated it through again. And then what happened was there was a problem with the delivery of biscuits because there was a flood in a warehouse somewhere. So our biscuits didn't arrive. The guy responsible for setting up the room had been on customer experience training kind of like the week before, where we had pumped it into people that they really need to go the extra mile, all that sort of stuff. So this guy decided to nip around to Tesco and for a special treat, bought a tin of chocolate biscuits. And so you can get, and it was for the board. And so I got a real rollicking for it. But when I spoke to the guy afterwards, I said, I would hope that you would do exactly the same again.
Yeah.
Because your intention was good. And it's that thing about protecting your people from, you know, all the stuff above, so that they do the right thing. I think that's a brilliant point that you made there.
But there's also the need to, you know, not get lost in spuddling. So spuddling is that thing where you spend a lot of time on trivial variations or issues which don't really matter, don't make any difference. You know, I suspect the bank won't succeed because it stops putting chocolate biscuits in people's rooms. That makes absolutely no difference whatsoever. It might be a visible symbol. People might believe it's a visible symbol that there are cutbacks and you therefore need to do stuff. But you know, it's not going to make any difference to the bottom line.
Yeah, I agree. And then just to finish off on that question in terms of the metaphor piece, in terms of what it feels like, leadership feels like a sense of belonging and togetherness for me. It's where people naturally feel like they want to be part of something, and they're doing what they do not because they're being told, it's because it's from within.
Yeah.
Okay. So
that links, I think, to you know, the trio of people who I always referenced around understanding our brains and the way we think. You know, Viktor Frankl talks about man's search for meaning, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And obviously it was written at a certain time, so by man he means people's search for meaning, I guess. That even in the face of the worst possible deprivation, so he was as you probably know, Alan, he was interned in a prisoner of war camp in the Second World War as a Jew, and saw the worst privations, but said even in those privations I could find happiness in something higher, like thinking about my wife. And said that demonstrates that we're all searching for something that has meaning in our lives always, and we can always go with something that has meaning. So I think what you describe around belonging, I think that fits with that idea. We want to do something that has meaning, that we belong to something which will derive progress against that. And in health and care, it should be so easy to do that, shouldn't it?
Yeah, it should. And just imagine if all people in positions of leadership had that approach rather than the approach of I need to control and tell people what to do. You know, just imagine how much more we've achieved and delivered.
Sometimes, I mean, I think there's obviously successful leaders know when to deploy different leadership styles. So you have to direct people sometimes. Yeah. You know, if the room's burning down and you know where the fire exit is, you have to tell people to get out over there right now. So that's okay, but it's a contextual thing, isn't it? It's not a way of being constantly. And that, I would say, if you're going to tell people what to do, then you don't know the right thing to do in all situations, so it won't be right. Most of the time they don't want to do it anyway, so they'll resent you for it, and you're wasting all their experience and expertise. So why would you want to do that? Why wouldn't you want to embrace their ideas, their expertise, their experience, and do that collectively in a way which drives improvement and performance up?
Yeah, it fascinates me, this area, because I don't know if you've come across the term. It's a Japanese term, omotenashi. Have you heard that before?
No.
So I was fascinated by the way people delivered service when I visited Japan. So, for instance, you would go to not an expensive tea shop, and when the tea was brought, it would be placed on the table in front of you, but then the server would adjust the angle of the handle of the cup and make the teaspoon parallel to that, and just move the sugar a little bit closer so that it's easier for you. And anyway, I discovered that this was called a motenashi, which the literal translation into English is hospitality. But it was described to me more meaningfully as taking personal pleasure from paying attention to fine detail in delivering a service, which I think is just beautiful. So I researched this, and I actually wrote some training called Omotenashi, Heartfelt Hospitality. And part of the ethos of Omotenashi is that the person in front of the customer is the very best person to make decisions about what the customer needs. And so it kind of says operating manuals are flawed, really, because they just try to predict what's going to happen when we don't necessarily know that. And it also, another one of the core principles is that a moment of service happens between two people and will never be repeated in that way ever again, because one or both people might be in a different mindset another time. It might be raining rather than the sun is out, all of this sort of stuff. And so what it's about is really helping people to tune into the other person, and anticipate what they need and feel free to be able to do what they think is right. And I think it's just such a wonderful concept. With, you know, in your area, I think that's, and we kind of touched on it already, because you can't give people complete freedom, especially when you're dealing with such serious situations as you guys. So it must be a really, really tough balance to strike sometimes.
Yeah. And well, it comes down to risk, I think, often. But to the omotenashi, which sounds brilliant, actually. You know, we might call that personalization, mightn't we, in terms of the jargon that we use. So if you've got somebody with multiple morbidities living in a poorer part of town, and you're there to support them, what are you going to do? You know, what choices are you going to make about which of their mental, physical, and social needs you're going to address? And I think what we're moving away from is this sense of, you know, I've stolen the words from elsewhere as usual, but, you know, we often see people as guests in our organisation, and we don't always treat them very well. You know, so we've all had letters from a health care organisation or a council that's got lots of capital letters in it about, if you don't do this, then don't come, you know, and if you don't come, well, then we're getting rid of you, you know, you can't come anyway. And that's really that ethos of, well, you're a guest in our organisation, so you've got to follow our rules. And as we should recognise in the 21st century, the things that affect the health and care system are multi-morbidity, people having more than one thing that they're living with, and deprivation, mainly. So the idea that, you know, we deal with people in an episodic way is redundant. They can't be fixed. What's that all about anyway, if you want to get into a deeper conversation? So we need to be partners of theirs, and we're not the only ones. So we should see ourselves as guests in their lives. And if we're a guest in somebody's life, we start to realise that, all right, so there's a family or not, there's a carer or not, there's council support or not, or there's some charity people that come in, or there's a neighbour, you know, we're all involved. So how do we all get involved together, and how do we think about what that person wants and needs at that point in time? And understand that we're all providing some kind of support and joining that up. So that idea of, you know, personalising the needs of that individual is really important. I went out, and I think if you look at the settings within which we deliver care, you most care is delivered in people's homes.
Yeah.
You're not in charge. You can't manage the care environment. And there's lots of other stuff going on. And some care is provided in clinics, and so quite a lot of care is provided in hospital settings. So if you're in a hospital setting, you are in control of the environment. You can standardize things, but you still need to see the person. We're in, increasingly understanding that. But in community settings, I think people are much more used to dealing with this sense of risk and issues. I'll give you an example. So I went out with a district nurse to see somebody home. It's one of the things I love doing, because you get to see how people really live in modern Britain. You see what a brilliant job the staff do. We arrived, I think, to dress this lady's legs. So somebody's got wet legs because they've got leg ulcers because of pressure on the legs. But she was in tears because she couldn't afford the care agency, and the care agency wasn't necessarily very good. So they hadn't turned up. And that meant that she hadn't been able to get changed because her washing was on a maid, and one of the pull ones that goes up to the ceiling, and her son had done that for her, who'd been round the day before and hung it up, but she couldn't reach it. And that meant that she was dirty. She felt dirty, and she felt that she didn't know what she was going to do about money. She didn't know what she was going to do about this care agency. They said she couldn't. She'd arranged to switch to another one, but they were threatening her with not letting her go and fining her for leaving and holding to her contract and all this sort of stuff. So the district nurse who was there to dress her legs, what'd she do? Well, I got the washing down and folded it up. She sort of sorted the lady out to get dressed, and we talked to the care agency, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Wasn't this our job? We're not paid. It wasn't in the manual that's what you're there for.
Yeah.
That's what you end up doing. Now, I think that sort of epitomizes the fact that's down to in the past, that's been down to personal approaches and preferences and values. But in the future, it must be about a team that always does those sorts of things, who knows there's a son who comes in on a certain day, who has the care agency as part of, has communication with the NHS professionals, the council knows what's going on, etc. So we can respond to the needs of people in the way that you describe, Alan, which is, how do we make how are we hospitable to them in that moment about the things they most need at that point in time?
Yeah, and I think the other thing that you've raised for me there is about how I think it is a responsibility of leadership to continually remind people of what the end is, rather than get lost in the means. Because, like the operating manual was designed with good intention, because it is the means towards the end of delivering great service. But the moment you get obsessed with the operating manual, you lose sight of the end. And you're delivering what it says, but people aren't receiving a great service. Yeah. So I think that's a really important part of leadership.
Yeah. And part of what you said there, I think, is also one of the fundamentals of leadership, isn't it? You need to be able to paint a compelling version of the future. Yeah. That people say, oh, do you know what? That's a common endeavour, a belief, a belonging towards something. You need to engage people in creating it, so they recognise that it's something that they want and it's built on something. And you need to be able to demonstrate to people that it's deliverable. It's not so far out of reach that they think they're never going to be able to do that, or that we're delivering some of it already.
and also, you reminded me of another story here. So I was running a hotel, and we were having a big extension of bedrooms built, and it was a wedding venue, which meant, you can imagine, people were not particularly impressed that they had booked this wedding venue, and that part of it was a building site. So in order to demonstrate leadership to our team, what we did was created what it was going to look like in 12 months' time, and fixed everybody on how brilliant that would be, and admitted to them that in the meantime, it would be painful, because understandably, people weren't going to be happy sometimes. Now, as it happened, we had a beautiful walled garden where you couldn't see the building site and all that sort of stuff. So we managed it reasonably well. But the point was, to your point, we created this compelling vision of the future, which helped people get through the pain in the present.
Yeah, yeah. And the important thing you've described there as well, Alan, is being honest with people and treat them like grown-ups.
Yeah.
You know, not pretending that there aren't problems or issues or that things aren't going to be tough. Because people have worked that out for themselves already, usually, and they don't want you coming along and saying, yeah, it'll be all right, really, there's no problems. It's kind of like, well, what can we do about it? How do we deal with what's in front of us, and how do we stay focused on what the result is at the end?
Yeah, dead right. And that you've made me think now about, you were talking about values-based leadership. I think, unfortunately, in the values space, too many people make it out to be this kind of nirvana panacea of loveliness when we start thinking about values. Whereas I take actually the opposite view, that values is a way to help us through a tricky, dirty, messy world.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's very practical rather than this highfalutin from a leadership point of view.
That's exactly right. So in all my organisations, I meet all the new starters every month. And in a trust, that's usually about 80 or 100 people. Mm-hmm. And I always ask them why they do the job. You know, what's their motivation for doing this? Why'd you come here? And that's really interesting. It's always really energizing and always really powerful and always fantastic conversation. But that then leads into the fact that, well, obviously you've got a motivation. And if you dig underneath some of that, there's usually a set of values there. Describe the values of the organization and then describe exactly as you've just said. You might think these are things that are just stuck up on the wall, but you're being recruited for your values, you're inducted for your values, and you're appraised for the values, because when there isn't a right answer, where do you go? Mm-hmm. And the world's, variable, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Yeah. And so where do you go? Where do you go when there's no right answer? And in health and care, there's often no right answer. Someone with capacity chooses to do something incredibly unwise. You can't tell them not to. What are you going to do? How are you going to approach it? Or if you think you're not going to have enough ventilators to save everybody's life during the pandemic, what do you do? Yeah. So these are really important and powerful things that are touchstones at the most difficult times in our lives.
Mm. And that induction session that you mentioned, are those two questions? Are they regular? So however often, and then do you attend each of them?
Yeah, I do all of them. Yeah. So and they're every month. So it's one of my favourite things, getting to meet all the new starters as well. And we also ask them for their fresh eyes view, because they're monthly, people have been in pause for a few days as a minimum, and might be in pause for a couple of months because they might have missed some of the dates or longer. So we just ask them, come on then, with your fresh eyes, what do you think we could do better?
Yeah. So you're taking me back to when I had a leadership role in organisations now, and the only bit that I miss really is what we're talking about now, the interaction with frontline people. So I used to attend our inductions as well, and I used to tell people three things. One was to pat themselves on the back because they were the very best person that we saw when we were recruiting for the role. The second thing was, if you need to break the rules to make a guest happy, do it, but tell your boss quickly. And then the third one was, and this was, bear in mind, this was at a hotel, which was a 200-acre estate, 5-star hotel, golf court, nice place. The third thing was, if you can't enjoy yourself working here, you're a sad git. And we used the fresh eyes bit. We used to invite new starters to stay in the hotel with a partner for free and have a meal in the fine dining restaurant to experience the place, and also tell us what they thought we could do better. Yeah. And you just got so much investment because of that goodwill. And frontline people, at the end of the day, they are the ambassador of the organization, not the person in your position or in my time.
Yeah, and it's the people. So I would say that, every interaction you have with somebody, can improve your reputation of your team, and reputation of your organisation. And why not? You know, why wouldn't you want to have a good reputation as a person, as a team, as an organisation? And if you think about the values that we've got and the way that you want to be at your best, then that will happen. And if you look at who has most interactions with the public, well, it's reception. Yeah. It's healthcare support workers who are unregistered, often maligned by the government. So they talk about non-clinically qualified people. Hang on a minute, you know, healthcare assistants, healthcare support workers do have qualifications, not registered with a professional body, but they've got qualifications. They're highly skilled, sometimes low-paid people who are doing an amazing job.
Yeah. So,
you know, looking at people in those roles, porters, receptionists, people who answer the phone in the office, they're the ones who define what people think of you, as well as your kind of frontline staff. But as I said, many, many thousands of frontline staff are unregistered professionals.
And I remember having a conversation actually, because you know, we trusted, and it's in response to your mention of receptionists. So in that hotel, we trusted those ladies and gentlemen to welcome guests from our most important clients, the clients that generated most profit for our business. And I remember asking the MD of the company, why was it that those people in that position were paid less than somebody in the finance office tapping numbers into a spreadsheet? And could we do something about it? And the answer was no, nothing happened actually, because it was in the too difficult box. But all these years later, I still think that's a valid question.
Yeah, well, these are valid questions. And similarly, I think you go in somewhere, you can tell whether you can tell in a few minutes whether you think you're going to like the culture or not.
Yeah.
And one of the things that really struck me running the trust that I just left last year was when the Care Quality Commission came, you know, when external visitors came, like you would leave them to reception to bring them down, or everyone have a special delegation. And or you could walk in several entrances, so you might not get straight to reception, you might walk down the corridors or whatever. And one of the things they always said was, whenever we've been here, people smile at you, they say hello, and they ask if you need anything. Are you all right? Are you lost? Is it something you need? And also, if you say to them in the conversations that you're worried about something, they'll ask why. And then they'll go and have a look at it. They won't say you're wrong.
Yeah,
it's not like that. You know, they'll say, oh, okay, we're going to have a look at that. You know, so that kind of professional curiosity and just being pleasant and interested, you know, goes so far.
Yeah, and leadership is what actually makes that happen. It doesn't happen on its own. Reminded me now, I did a project with a prison, and it was another 31 practices project. So we took the values of the prison and translated it into tangible day-to-day behaviours. One of them, one of the values was embracing the Welsh language and culture. So in the workshops, you know, we say, so what behaviour would you see around here if this value was alive and kicking? So what came out, and by the way, they call them men, not prisoners. So the men, they took part in these mixed workshops. And one of the behaviours that we came up with was greeting in Welsh. Now, it was an accident, but what we didn't realise when we came up with we greet each other in Welsh was that when visitors came, there was a tendency for everybody, whether you were one of the men or in the kitchen or doing the cleaning, or you were a member of prison officer, whatever it is, because that became embedded and instilled as a behavior. One of the biggest compliments that place received from visitors was, when we go to other places, people's eyes are on the floor, you know, whereas here it's eye-to-eye contact and we're greeted in Welsh. This is amazing. How do you do that? It's just those small things that create the impression and perception of an organization.
But you got to role model those, as you say, you codify them and you role model them. And the other thing that we've tried to sort of instill right across organisations that I've led is that you bring your whole self to work.
Yeah.
And again, that can be a conscious or an unconscious thing. So it might be, you know, if you think about things from a sort of friction and stress and pressure side, it might be that you're having money worries, or you might have relationship problems, or you might be worried about your children, you know, doing the GCSEs or whatever it is. There's stuff that's going on for you, yeah, which will be there somewhere. Or it might be from a sort of knowledge and experience side of things. So you know, I'm a carer of somebody with a learning disability. I'm the brother of someone who died by suicide. My mum and dad are nearly 80, and my mum cares for my dad who's not worked for years, who's disabled. So I could describe myself as a carer. I could describe myself as somebody bereaved by suicide. I could describe myself as the son of people who are probably going to need some care support themselves. And people see me entirely differently. And yep, those things are true. Those things, just because I've got a shirt and tie on at work or whatever, it doesn't mean those things aren't true. But what we've got, if we say you bring in all of that with you, how much experience and knowledge and skill does that bring? And how much empathy? Because the kind of people we're supporting are just like you know. And why would we not think that, you know, you've got, you know, skills and experiences or issues that are the same as the ones that affect our patients and our service users and our carers?
Spot on. And this for me broadens the topic of leadership to, you know, sometimes when we think about leadership, we tend to think about leadership in a work setting. But what you've introduced there is leadership in a life setting. Mm. And one of the biggest reasons for me, for everybody in the organization taking part in those 31 practices workshops, is that actually some of the less senior, less well-paid people have more life leadership experience than the more well-paid, more senior people. And so why would you leave that? Why would you not tap into that?
Exactly. So, you know, people, they do all sorts of things. Like, so set up charities that then turn into businesses, for, I don't know, employing people with learning disability, or providing care and support over a weekend for people who've got respite needs. You know, they do brilliant work, usually in a very agile way, against the odds, and breaking, you know, stretching the rules and trying to, you know, break boundaries all the time.
Yeah, and imagine those people that have come here from a different country on their own or with a child, and had to start, you know, what learning must that have given them compared to the guy that was lucky enough to go to a good school, good university, get on a graduate scheme, get a couple of promotions, but hasn't anywhere near the life experience of those other people.
Yeah, and these uncomfortable truths are part of leadership too. So leadership can be really uncomfortable. And I think it's important that it is, you know, so we've got a substantial amount of work on anti-racism. We're an anti-racist system. 580 organisations have signed up to an anti-racist movement during quite febrile times. And that's all come about from us, you know, being uncomfortable in the conversation we're having. So looking at ourselves and saying, you know, personally, I've got white privilege. You know, so I'm from a working class shipbuilding town in the northwest, where the idea of privilege is about being posh, you know, going to private school or whatever. And I went to a comprehensive in a shipbuilding town. I'm not posh. I haven't got privilege, but I've been educated to understand I do. You know, I never have to worry about the colour of my skin when I go into a room.
Yeah,
I don't have to worry about my gender when I go into a room, or whether, you know, there's all sorts of other protected characteristics that people have. So we've been on that journey. We've also had very challenging conversations about microaggressions, our impact upon other people, the way in which society is flawed, the way that society is structurally racist. Yeah. You know, just this morning did the briefing to staff and drew on, you know, the Runnymede Trust showing 75% of women of colour faced racism in the workplace. 22% of them had changed their name to fit in. Just think about that for a minute. 22% of people had changed their name to fit in. Good God. So there's all sorts of I think leadership often is about sort of tackling these uncomfortable truths, but doing it in a subtle and sensitive way and a persistent way. So leadership's also persistent, I would say. And
just on that, Rob, the example that comes to my mind to support what you were saying about the change of name, there was some research done around job applications and CVs. You know, and the name Mohammed being changed doubles your chance of getting an interview, and that
So it's kind of these things are true. We've got a saying really, which is, you know, we should stop admiring problems and start dealing with them.
Yeah.
So I don't want any more data. I don't need any more data on the fact that, you know, Black Caribbean, Black African communities face the worst sort of access and experiences of healthcare, face the most racism, etc., find it more difficult to get access to vaccines, they've got less confidence in vaccines, etc., etc., etc. So what do we do about it then? And, you know, you just have to look around you to see that there isn't the representative leadership. The leadership we have doesn't represent the communities we serve. So what we've done is, you know, we've got 10 big ambitions as a partnership. One of them is that our partnership will mirror the society that our leadership will mirror the society that we support. Against that, during COVID, when it became clear that people from different communities had much worse experiences, but there were no recommendations about what to do about it. We did a review with Professor Dame Donna Kinnair, which challenged us to say, look, we said, look, we're doing a lot in this space. Is it enough? And what more could we do? We did a really, really fantastic piece of work, I think, which took about 6 weeks, engaged a lot of third sector organisations and others, came up with a set of recommendations, and then our standing item on our partnership board. So every meeting we talk about them, every meeting. And I say it's not like the ice bucket challenge. You know, it's a fad. Everyone said, well, you know, following the murder of George Floyd, this is an issue for everybody. Let's talk about it being an issue for everybody. And 2 years later, we're not talking about it anymore. You know, we need to keep talking about it all the time. So I think leadership can be uncomfortable. It has to be persistent, and you have to be prepared to look at yourself.
Yeah. And I the word that's coming through for me is, it's similar to persistent, but I'm thinking relentless actually, rather than persistent, because it really does just have to keep on going. And hotels, I'm so grateful for being brought up in that industry, because without realizing it, I learned some really fundamental principles about leadership. The first was to recognize that you're only there for your guests. That's the first thing. The second thing is that unless your people are proud ambassadors of your organization, then your guests aren't going to get looked after. And then everything else just has to get looked after somehow. And when I moved from that sector into, say, banking, for instance, all of a sudden, the day of work was not about being with your people and serving others. It was all of a sudden about being in loads of meetings and showing PowerPoint presentations. Like, what is all this about? And the other thing about hotels is they have very little in the way of resource. So we never had external training, for instance. And that's all a lot of corporate organizations do for their people, is external stuff. So it was a really strange difference. I want to ask you about something, though, because we've talked a lot about how important leadership behaviors are and how you can either improve the perception of yourself and your organization or not. I use a term called the leadership shadow, which basically is that point about behaviors. But it makes the point that the more senior you are, the longer a shadow you cast. And I talk to people about how that might not seem fair, because, you know, why should you get judged for some small behavior? But the fact of the matter is, it's the reality. So you just might as well live with it. Have you got a view on that?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I think when I first became a chief executive, I remember I was musing out loud about something. I was in an office at the time. I had to sit in the open plan or the office, it depends. But in that job, I had an office, and I'd come out and sort of wondered about something out loud that I was wondering about. And the next day, this whole action plan had been developed, and they'd already started making all these changes. I said, "What are you doing?" They said, "Well, you said we had to do it." I said, "I didn't say that, did I?" Actually. It made me realise that whatever, doesn't really matter what the impact you intend to have, it's the impact that's felt, actually. And as you say, you cast a long shadow, and you can use that to, I guess, on a stretch metaphor, you can use that to provide shade, or you could use that to keep people in the dark. And I think you want to provide shade against something so people can get on. But it is important. I mean, one of the consequences of being very clear about your values and behaviours is, as you've said, Alan, people can call you out on them, and I love it when they do, genuinely do. So I remember about 10 years ago now, when I was really getting into this, and I was leading an organisation in Leeds, and it was about the time of the Francis Report, and I'd been to a session in the conference. I think I'd spoken about what we were doing, and that had gone really well. And I think we just had some results about something in terms of delivery, which had gone really well, and the money was looking really good. And I felt fantastic. And I got back into the building, and somebody was in my office. One of the team was in the office with a couple of other people, and I got balled in, smiling, and went, like that move. We all know what that means.
Yeah.
So and they all sort of went out, sort of laughing and joking, and then Anne, she was called, said, "I want to talk to you," and she was only a fairly junior member of staff, and I thought, "Oh, she's going to tell me how great I am." And she said, "You know what? You just made me feel that big." She said, "I was having a really difficult conversation with a couple of people that I've been building up to all week, and we were right in the middle of it, and you came and went, why didn't you just say, do you mind if how long you're going to be? Do you need it? Do you need 10 minutes? Or I'm happy to sit outside." That would have made all the difference. And I thought, yeah, you're right. Really right. Yeah, why did I do that? It was just stupid. Yeah. So I think, creating a culture where people would say that to you and tell that to your face, irrespective of who they are, I think is a gift.
Yeah,
it just really helps me, because without feedback, without understanding what your impact is that you're actually having, you'll be stuck with the impact you intend to have, which will be not what's happening at all.
So I've got one that isn't even in response to behaviour. So the bank that I mentioned. So I was based at a building on Bishopsgate. So it must have been around about 7 o'clock in the morning when I was going to work, and I was walking from Liverpool Street Station down Bishopsgate to this building. We had a night cleaning service, so our night cleaning team were going off duty at around about that time. And I crossed some of the cleaning team on my way to the office. And one of them said, "Good morning." And she said, "Do you know what the practice is for today?" I was like, "No, I don't." And I had to take out my carry card and remind myself. But we had a laugh about it, and that was the most important thing, because everybody understood that that's what you needed to do. That is practice. Yeah. I could have said, "I'm not at work yet." That wouldn't have been the thing. No.
So I think once you get into that, then good stuff happens. So I mean, one of the cleaners approached me and got a mobile phone out and said, "Rob, have you seen this? Somebody on Care Opinion is saying that we're rubbish. Have you seen it?" And I was like, "Oh no, I haven't seen that. Show me. Let's have a look and see what's going on." It's one of the cleaners. It's not even her service.
Yeah.
But she feels connected to the organisation, understands the need to see what's going on. It puts the lie to the idea that cleaners and cooks and housekeepers don't access the internet and aren't interested in digital. because they do in their everyday life, there's a personal mobile, so I think it's essential that we get into these cultures of continuous feedback, really.
Yeah. And for me, the big point here is that you're employing a person, not a person to perform a task.
Yeah.
Get the whole thing. So why not use all of that? And they enjoy it as well.
Yeah.
Now, I'm conscious of time, and it's been a brilliant conversation. It's gone like a flash. But I need to ask you the last question, which is this. What are you encouraged to do differently about leadership as a result of our conversation today?
Well, I think so we're in an interesting period. We just had a meeting of all of the people doing my job. There's 42 of us in the country, and so I've got about £5 billion to spend through others to try and improve outcomes in West Yorkshire. And in the meeting, somebody said, "Okay, put your hand up if you've been through a winter. Winter's difficult in the health and care system usually. Have you been through a winter? Who's been through 5? Who's been through 10? Who's been through 20? Who's been through 30? So, I still got my hand up, and others in the room still have, and said, well, fantastic, look at all that experience.
Yeah.
And then they said, who's been through a pandemic and led the recovery of systems post-pandemic of a novel virus where we've got substantial staffing problems in an era of Brexit, and nobody put their hand up. So one of the things that I've got to reflect on, I think, is we're in a new context. We just changed the dynamic by creating an organisation in our system that I lead in, which will make a difference. So I think I've got to spend a bit of time thinking about, well, what changes do I need to make to my leadership then? Because I've been doing this for 6 years, but the context's now different. The organisation's changed. How am I going to have to change? My values don't change. Mm-hmm. I always say to people, I wrote down what I believe in 2003-04 as part of a national programme that I was on. They called it a leadership manifesto. I thought that sounded a bit gimmicky. Is the polite term. So I just wrote down what I believed in, and that's never changed. So those things are fixed, but how I deploy them, the behaviours that we exhibit, things that I'm going to have to think about. But it's been a really good reminder of the importance of values-based leadership, I think.
Good. And I think you've touched on a point there that I believe in passionately, and that is that content without context is toast. Because, it's this thing about so many people bowl up to a conference and they make mad notes from this speaker at the front of the room. But if they don't apply it in their context, it could do more harm than good, actually. So I think your point about recognizing the changing environment and asking the question about what needs to be done in this situation is a great note to end the session on.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time today.
No, thanks, Alan. I enjoyed it.
Cheers.
Good way to spend an hour.
Cheers.